He was the king of rock and roll, flashing lights, screaming fans, and a love story the world watched unfold. She was the woman at his side, the one we all believed was his forever. But beneath the glamour of Graceland and the carefully crafted smiles was a secret, a fracture no one dared to speak of. What if the story of their heartbreaking divorce wasn't what the world was told? What if someone close to Elvis, someone like his own father, knew the truth all along and only dared to reveal it after the king was gone? Stay with us, because what Vernon Presley finally confessed will make you question everything you thought you knew. In the late 1950s, Elvis Presley was already a legend in the making, a young man with a velvet voice and a hypnotic presence. But while stationed in Germany during his military service, fate introduced him to someone who would change the course of his life, a quiet, striking teenager named Priscilla Presley. Their meeting seemed like something out of a dream. Two lives from vastly different worlds colliding in a moment that would spark an intense, complicated romance. She was just 14, the daughter of an Air Force officer, and yet something about her drew Elvis in. For him, it wasn't just infatuation, it was a new kind of escape. Over time, their bond deepened. Against the wishes of many, Priscilla eventually left Europe behind and moved into Elvis's sprawling Graceland estate while still in her teens. There, among velvet drapes, golden records, and the ever-watchful eyes of the Memphis Mafia, she tried to balance her youth with the pressure of living in the king's world. In May of 1967, they made it official. The press had a field day. Their Las Vegas wedding was flashy, fast, and wrapped in the mystique of a fairy tale. Soon after, their daughter Lisa Marie was born, completing the image of the perfect American family. To the outside world, everything looked flawless. They were the ultimate celebrity couple, young, rich, beautiful. The photos showed tender smiles, elegant outfits, and a baby girl cradled between two adoring parents. Fans believed they were witnessing a rare kind of love, one strong enough to withstand fame, temptation, and time. Priscilla was praised for her grace. Elvis, as always, was adored for his charm and talent. But behind the scenes, the reality was far more fragile. Graceland held more than glamour. Within its walls were long silences, emotional distance, and the growing weight of secrets unspoken. Priscilla tried to keep up with the fast-paced life Elvis led, a life that often revolved more around late-night escapades than quiet family dinners. And as the curtain remained firmly closed to the public, a quiet tension was beginning to build, one that even those closest to Elvis could feel, but few dared to question. Something was unraveling beneath the surface, something no wedding photo or glowing headline could hide forever. As Elvis's career reached dazzling new heights, so too did the public's fascination with his private life. Colonel Tom Parker, his ever-calculating manager, knew exactly how to keep the myth alive. For Parker, the image of Elvis as a devoted husband and family man was more than just sentimental, it was strategic. Behind closed doors, whispers suggested that the timing of Elvis's proposal wasn't entirely organic. The Christmas season engagement to Priscilla felt like something of a publicity fix, orchestrated to preserve Elvis's wholesome appeal in an era where public perception was everything. The marriage became a carefully timed event, glittering with charm on the outside, but haunted by motives that went deeper than love. After Lisa Marie was born, something in Elvis began to shift. At first, it seemed like the natural growing pains of new parenthood, but those close to him sensed something else, a retreat, an emotional distancing that even Priscilla couldn't reach through. He grew more withdrawn, more elusive, spending long hours with his entourage and even longer nights immersed in his own world. Graceland, once a promise of family life, became a revolving door of distractions, parties, and the constant presence of his loyal but enabling inner circle. The man Priscilla had waited for and adored now seemed to be slipping away, moment by moment, note by note. For Priscilla, life inside the gates of Graceland was anything but a fairy tale. She was young, alone, and trying to find her place in a world built around someone else's spotlight. Surrounded by luxury, yet starved of emotional connection, she began to feel like a stranger in her own life. The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's close-knit group of friends, weren't just his companions. They were his shield, And as Elvis turned more to them and less to her, the distance widened. Priscilla found herself battling not just loneliness, but the growing realization that love, when buried under fame and pressure, can quietly erode without a sound. Vernon Presley, watching from the sidelines, saw it all with a father's intuition and a growing sense of unease. He had always respected his son's choices, but now even he couldn't deny that something was cracking beneath the surface. The smiles for the cameras, the tender glances, they all began to look more like rehearsed performances than genuine moments. The perfect image the world adored was slowly beginning to tremble, and those closest to Elvis could feel the tremors. But no one, not even Vernon, was prepared for what would eventually come to light. As time went on, the emotional cracks in Elvis and Priscilla's relationship deepened into canyons. Feeling neglected and emotionally invisible, Priscilla found herself drifting towards someone who offered her attention, presence, and understanding. Her karate instructor, Mike Stone. What began as a quiet connection turned into something more. For the first time in years, Priscilla felt seen. Their growing closeness became a source of both comfort and guilt. Still, the affair filled a void that life with Elvis no longer could. And while she tried to hide the truth from the outside world, behind closed doors, the emotional distance between her and Elvis was no longer something she could ignore or endure. But it wasn't just Priscilla who sought solace elsewhere. Elvis had long been entangled in a web of casual flings and secret affairs. On tour and even at home, he surrounded himself with women who fed his ego, but never truly reached his heart. Each encounter chipped away at the fragile foundation of their marriage. To Priscilla, these betrayals weren't just physical. They were a constant reminder that her love alone could never be enough to anchor him. Elvis, for all his charisma and stage presence, remained emotionally unreachable, floating in a world of fame, fantasy, and fleeting passion. In a final attempt to revive what once was, Elvis and Priscilla renewed their vows during a trip to Hawaii. It was meant to be a turning point, a reset button. But even under the golden sun and swaying palms, the connection that had once tied them together felt threadbare. The gesture was beautiful, but the feelings behind it had become hollow. The emotional closeness they were trying to reignite was no longer there, and both of them knew it. They were playing out the final act of a story that had already quietly ended. Then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, Priscilla told Elvis what he had likely feared, but perhaps expected. She was leaving. She could no longer live in the shadows of what their love used to be. The weight of her words hit him like a blow. Enraged and betrayed, Elvis confided to those close to him that he had considered hiring someone to kill Mike Stone. The intensity of his reaction revealed just how deep the pain ran. But despite his fury, reason ultimately prevailed. Priscilla left, and with that, a chapter closed, but not without leaving behind a storm of emotions, secrets, and questions still waiting to be answered. In 1978, just 1 year after the world lost Elvis Presley, his father Vernon quietly shared something that sent ripples through fans and followers alike. Writing in Good Housekeeping, Vernon peeled back the polished layers of his son's carefully curated public life. Among the heartfelt reflections and personal memories, one line stood out: haunting, simple, and devastating. Elvis realized after the wedding, he never truly wanted to be married. It wasn't said with judgment or bitterness, but with the kind of quiet sorrow only a father could carry. Those words hinted at a deeper truth, one the world had never fully seen, buried beneath the spotlight and the screaming crowds. The lifestyle Elvis had chosen, or perhaps been swept into, was relentless. Night after night on the road, the constant pull of fame and the crushing pressure of always being the king left little room for something as delicate and demanding as a real marriage. Vernon had watched as the long stretches of separation, the conflicting priorities, and the endless cycle of performances slowly wore down whatever intimacy had once existed. Love doesn't thrive in distance, and for Elvis and Priscilla, that distance became their most persistent companion. It wasn't just about time apart, it was about emotional absence, moments missed, and a growing sense that neither of them truly fit into the other's world anymore. Vernon didn't cast blame. He didn't point fingers. Instead, he offered a sobering thought that lingered long after the article ended. Maybe the marriage was never built to last. Maybe it was a beautiful illusion, fueled by young passion, public pressure, and good intentions, but destined to fracture under the weight of reality. In his quiet, reflective tone, Vernon left behind a message not of scandal, but of truth, the kind that only becomes clear after everything else falls away. What he saw behind the closed doors of Graceland may have been far different from what the world believed, and what he finally shared may change the way we see the most famous love story in rock and roll history. On the day of their divorce, the world expected sorrow, distance, maybe even bitterness. But what happened in that courtroom left even those closest to Elvis and Priscilla stunned. As they signed the final decree, dissolving what had once been one of the most iconic marriages in American pop culture, they didn't turn their backs on each other. Instead, they held hands, fingers intertwined, not as strangers or adversaries, but as two people who had shared something profound, something the world would never fully understand. It wasn't a performance. There were no flashing cameras or choreographed smiles, just a quiet, intimate moment that spoke louder than any headline ever could. As they stepped outside the courthouse, Elvis turned to Priscilla, his voice soft, his expression full of emotion, and began to sing. The song, "I Will Always Love You." It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't for show. It was raw, vulnerable, and heartbreakingly honest. The same voice that had electrified sold-out arenas was now offering a private farewell, not to a woman he despised, but to the one he had once imagined growing old with. It was a farewell full of tenderness, a final verse in the love song they had tried so hard to keep alive. Years later, when Priscilla looked back on that day, she didn't speak with regret or resentment. Instead, she called it amazing. Not in the way that fairy tales end, but in the way two people can walk away from something broken while still holding on to the good that once was. The love hadn't vanished. It had simply changed shape. And though their marriage had ended on paper, their bond never fully dissolved. There remained between them a quiet respect, a thread of connection that refused to be severed by time or distance. Even after the final papers were signed, Elvis and Priscilla stayed close. They shared holidays, important moments with Lisa Marie, and occasional conversations that lasted well into the night. For Elvis, she remained a trusted presence, someone who had known him before the legend swallowed the man. And for Priscilla, Elvis was always more than just the king. He was her first great love, her once upon a time, and even in the final days of his life, that connection endured. Behind the gates of Graceland, long after the crowds faded, their story continued, quietly, tenderly, and on their own terms. If you've made it this far, you know this story goes far deeper than the headlines ever revealed. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you believe was really going on behind the scenes of Elvis and Priscilla's marriage? Drop your opinions and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from music history, and share this with a fellow Elvis fan who needs to hear the truth that only Vernon dared to reveal. Your voice keeps the legacy alive,